and not everybody can always be present right at that same time.
Okay. I didn't receive the questions. Maybe.
I didn't actually send questions.
Oh, okay.
So it'll be more of a
Okay.
free-flowing conversation. I do
Gotcha.
have questions that'll be directed towards you guys, specifics. And then if you feel the need to chime in anywhere or add anything, please feel free to do so. I just want to see more of an authentic, honest conversation. I think
Sure,
that's
sure.
what our community is looking for, is really hearing it. And I love the differences in what you guys bring, right? The different lenses, experiences, everything, which I think makes this a really awesome conversation, because you're tackling this from many different ways. And so it gives someone that opportunity to get access to community building, to self-building, to medical building as well at the same time.
Okay. All right.
Okay. So I think in 1 more minute, we're going to start, so that we'll be respectful and mindful of people's time. Today is Saturday.
Yes,
Okay.
definitely. And for anyone that didn't join, they're definitely able to,
That's right. That's right.
But thank you guys. This is going to be such an interesting conversation. And I was telling Sasha and Dr. Tekia earlier, this is actually part of a 2-part program. So we're working with DC Health on getting information out to the African community in terms of COVID-19 and the vaccination, mental health being part of that. And then now we're going to kick off a new program with the CDC Foundation doing similar work for the African community. Mental health was a big piece of that because of the pandemic and just how high the numbers rose and how much it affects us internally.
Okay. So women, we're good to go?
Yes, we can just go ahead and get started, and everyone can join in as they come. So Ms. Iffy.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. So glad to be here, and so glad to have a very, very wonderful group of panelists. So I'm sure you're joining us and that you can enjoy the conversation. This morning, we have as our moderator, Ms. Helen Fassier. She's the CEO for F3 Global Inc. and works very well with AWCAA. So we're happy to have you here, Ms. Helen. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Ms. Iffy, and good morning, everyone. And thank you to our panelists for joining today's edition of Mental Health and Wellness in the COVID-19 Pandemic Session. As Ms. Iffy said, my name is Helen Tisahaya of F3 Global Advisory Group. I'm the CEO, Managing Director, and Cultural Solution Officer for companies seeking to connect all their dots and make the greatest impact in their companies and communities. We work to offer a number of services across emerging markets through a variety of services such as strategic planning, market entry, and building platforms through logistics and events management. Today, I will serve as your moderator in this discussion, along with my esteemed panel of experts. And I just want to say I love this group because they really come with a wealth of knowledge, experiences, and perspectives on mental health that I think you guys will all find very valuable. I'm going to briefly introduce each speaker, and then they'll have an opportunity to tell you about themselves a little bit more about who they are, their work experiences, and more. So first, we'll start with Dr. Sandra Rode. Dr. Sandra Rode has served as a community leader and coordinator. She has used her strength in counseling, project design, program development, and mentoring to impact the lives of countless youth, teens, and young adults, which she has served for over 35 years. She has an immeasurable love for them and has been a faithful motivator of their emotional, mental, and spiritual growth. She's also the founder and CEO of Next Gen Empowerment Method, Inc., an organization that serves young and youth adults and their families from a holistic approach in the areas of mental health, social services, mediation and conflict resolution, as well as individual and family counseling. Dr. Rode holds a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology from the University of Maryland, College Park, and received both her master's and doctorate in psychology with a specialization in mediation and conflict resolution from the University of the Rockies, Colorado. She has been married to the one and only Mr. James Rode for 44 years and has 2 wonderful children, Kenneth and Tanisha. So Dr. Rode, if you'd like to introduce yourself a little bit more.
Hello, good morning to everybody. You pretty much said it all. Right now, we're in the process of having an open house for a building. We just opened up for our mental health program, and it is Next Gen Empowerment Method. What we're doing there is we're coming with a holistic approach. Most mental health facilities does not usually have resources. We usually have to send them out, but we have decided to house all the resources in this one building, which includes all of the types of therapy, virtual reality therapy, drama therapy, art therapy, massage aromatherapy, just about everything you can think of within the group. And so when someone comes into Next Gen, the first thing we do is get a person-centered chart made up, and then we pretty much take it from there. I've had a lot of experience with working with families for 45 years. And so this is just a new opportunity for me, or a new level actually, to delve into, to help the community. We actually serve Forestville, Capitol Heights, Suitland, and I can't remember the other area. So we open up and have an open house on June the 12th and the 13th, and it will be definitely on Facebook, and we welcome you to attend.
Thank you, Dr. Rowe, for your introduction, and please share that information with us. We'd love to share it with our community as well.
Sure.
Great. Next up, we have Sasha Raskin. She's the founder of Beautiful Mess, a mental health organization that runs corporate talks and events to combat loneliness, depression, and mental health stigma while fostering connection, intimacy, and self-awareness. Before that, she was a Hollywood literary agent representing dozens of bestsellers across the globe, and even briefly ran a technology company, all the while struggling with debilitating depression, for which she was ultimately hospitalized. She started A Beautiful Mess to be that resource that she wished she had while she was struggling. For her mental health work, she's delivered talks for platforms ranging from Venture University to the World Economic Forum's Global Shapers community. She's been named a Young Social Impact Hero by Thrive Global in partnership with Authority Magazine, and she'll be delivering a TED Talk San Francisco titled The Other Pandemic, We Must End Mental Health Stigma Now. Sasha, thank you for joining.
Yeah, thank you so much. Same thing, that was an incredibly thorough bio, but I guess maybe to add just a little bit more, really things culminated for me and got me to start my organization when I checked myself into psychiatric hospital and thought that my life was over as a result, that no one would want to date me or love me or even be my friend. And I thought that I needed to keep that a secret to have a normal life. And the idea of living a life that was a secret was so terrible. I went the opposite direction and I told everyone. I wrote a note to like 100 people and started saying it everywhere I went, at parties, first dates, and it was beautiful, but also broke my heart to hear as a result how many people had similar stories and were hiding it because there was so much shame. And that's why I started the organization, so we knew we're not alone and we could normalize having discussions about these topics. So I'm so glad to be here and thank you.
Thank you, Sasha. Thank you for sharing that. Well, and I definitely want to dive in a little bit more into that later. Okay, great. Our next speaker is Dr. Jakob Tekke. Dr. Jakob Tekke has a lengthy resume, so I'm going to try to shorten it as possible, but he'll definitely talk to you more about what he has been up to. So Dr. Tekke is a licensed staff psychologist at the University of Pennsylvania in the Counseling and Psychological Services. He leads a program called Let's Talk, a social justice-based counseling and outreach service aimed at providing students with easy access to counseling and informal consultations. He's also the founder and owner of Tesfa House Psychotherapy and Consulting, a private practice and consultation service that conducts mental health workshops both nationally and internationally to tackle mental health and to promote coping skills and mental well-being. To this end, he has served various workshops across the East African community, as well as with people of color in more than 15 cities, both in the US and Europe. And he's addressed various topics on mental health through different social media outlets. Through his organization, Dr. Tekke provides psychological services, including psychotherapy, psychological evaluation, and skill-based workshops to different marginalized communities, refugees, and survivors of torture. Further, he's a senior trainer at the Lion's Story, a nonprofit organization dedicated to racial literacy to resolve stressful racial encounters as well as racial trauma and assault. He provided training to individuals, local and national organizations, leaders, educators, students, and professionals. Additionally, he's an experienced social science researcher who specializes in survey research and program evaluation. His research focuses mainly on the East African refugees, immigrants, and asylum seekers, with a focus on their traumatic experiences, resettlement, and integration issues. Dr. Tekia also has many years of experience as a substance abuse counselor and trauma therapist. He earned an APA accredited doctorate in counseling psychology from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, as well as a Master of Science in Statistics, Master of Arts in Counseling Psychology, as well as a graduate certificate in Statistics Evaluation and Measurement from the same university. He has a Bachelor of Arts degree in Educational Psychology from the University of Asmara Ercha and completed a doctoral psychology internship and residency and postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Pennsylvania. He is a recipient of numerous prestigious awards, including Medal of Excellence awarded to the best PhD student at the University of Tennessee, and is a member of many professional organizations, including the American Psychological Association. Very impressive, Dr. Tekia. If you'd like to introduce yourself, and thank you for joining us.
I don't think I need to say much. I'm a little bit conscious and uncomfortable about it. I didn't realize it would be that much, but thank you so much. Really glad to be here. One of the things that I would like to share as part of my consultation group and outreach that we do with our community, the biggest project that we have is especially immigrants and refugees from East African communities. We strive to provide mental health training, at least a mental health first aid to every individual. I know it's a big project, it's a big challenge, but we aim to have everybody the conversation in their own household before it's too late. We have been dealing with a lot of suicide, a lot of mental health related issues, and we are working with a lot of organizations right now to bring this awareness and at the same time bring healing to the community that they are dealing in different layers, not only as an immigrants, but also as people of color with all the racial injustice that the country is going through at the moment. I'll share more as we move forward, but I will stop here for now.
Thank you for sharing that, and we'll definitely dig in deeper. But first, I want to actually start this discussion off with what Sasha's upcoming TED Talk is about, which is the other pandemic, right? The mental health crisis. For the last year, we've lived in a different world, one where we're all locked away from our families, communities, neighbors, confined to our computers and phones. It's like the only means of communication for some of us with the outside world, buried in social media fears, constantly bombarded by bad to worse news, terrified of catching an elusive and misunderstood illness, infighting across government, and for many frontline workers and caregivers, extremely overworked, stressed out, and in tears about having witnessed loss after loss. Actually, for all of us, I think we've all experienced the loss of someone or something on some level. So our discussion today is really about how has COVID impacted us in our life, specifically towards mental health. And according to a CDC study that I recently read, during June 2020, US adults reported considerably elevated adverse mental health conditions associated with COVID-19. Symptoms of anxiety disorder and depressive disorder increased considerably in the US between April to June of 2020, compared with the same year in 2019. Overall, that's a 40.9% of respondents in that study reported at least one adverse mental or behavioral health condition, including symptoms of anxiety disorders or depressive disorders, symptoms of trauma and stress-related disorders related to the pandemic, and having started or increased substance use to cope with stress or the emotions related to COVID-19. I think I want to ask you guys, like, we're all wondering what's going on, right? What's contributed to these drastic increases in numbers in such a short time span, and what type of disorders are you seeing in your personal work increase in the last year? So Dr. Tekia, if you'd like to start.
I think that's really a very good question, but also complicated. A lot of these change that we have noticed, I think the biggest part is how we try to navigate the pandemic itself. And one of the biggest issues that we noticed is that the parallel between a lot of mental health issue symptoms and the pandemic itself. For example, the pandemic took away our sense of safety and security, which is a typical symptom of trauma. When we experience that, one of the things that we have noticed is that the person who is trying to deal with the pandemic, not necessarily only experiencing the anxiety or other, symptoms of depression or trauma, but the symptoms might be as a result of the past trauma that has been triggered with the current situation. So it kind of feels like, we are dealing with the pandemic, but it might be all these things that we've been carrying on, and now it is triggered, it feels overwhelming. The other part is, if I could go, in that parallel, someone who is experiencing anxiety, they kind of feel overwhelmed, and they feel like they are losing control of the life or the environment that they are dealing with. Depression, similarly, kind of feeling stuck in the past. Anxiety feels like, you are stuck in the future. With trauma, similarly, you kind of lose your sense of control, like whatever you're trying to do, and you don't feel safe, even if you are in your own home. And the pandemic has attacked our sense of safety. As I was saying, we don't feel safe anywhere. So the body doesn't recognize, I think, if it is the pandemic or if it is the trauma that we have survived, especially for individuals who's been dealing with mild, moderate, or severe, mental health issues. Now it is going to be exaggerated because it's kind of becoming more re-traumatized, or the anxiety is, kind of provoked more. So the isolation, the loneliness, and this lose of control and safety, I think made it a lot more worse. I'm not sure, I don't feel confident to say that, like, we know what we are dealing with. It scares me what we are gonna know, 5-10 years from now, what the impact of this pandemic has been on our own mental health. I really don't know, and I'm not sure what that might look like. But the bottom line is, like, it kind of took the basic things that we had to survive as human beings. And as I mentioned earlier, if I could speak, for my own experience, not only as a psychologist, but what helps me survive. I'm a refugee and I am a torture survivor myself, like I have a lot of background in those kind of traumatic, experience, but the sense of support and belongingness has been really critical for my survival. The pandemic took away that. I couldn't meet, my friends. I couldn't talk, to my family. Everything is limited, especially for immigrants and low-income, families. We couldn't reach because of technology and, visits, to family members and others who are far away from us. Everything, kind of affected that sense of affiliation and belongingness that I'm talking about. So in all aspects, it kind of feels like, it took our foundation. And as a result, we become more vulnerable to the psychological issues. Not necessarily that we are experiencing severe mental health issues, but I think our ability to tolerate has been impacted. So we became more vulnerable, and as a result, a lot of reports has been shown as you shared it so far.
Thank you, that was great. Dr. Rode or Sasha, if you'd like to add anything. You're on mute, Dr. Rode.
Okay, I absolutely agree with Jakob. I don't think that the pandemic is actually the main cause. I think there were underlying issues, and then they were triggered by the fact that we were at home. A lot of people there's a difference between mental illness and mental health. And so a lot of people don't really pay any attention to the mental health, which is, our emotions and our thoughts and our feelings, and being able to solve problems and overcome difficulties. So during the pandemic, we were facing those difficulties. We were facing those problems right on, because outside of the home, we were able to, diverse and use that energy some other way. But at home, you're facing all of that. And so I don't think that pandemic is the sole reason that there's so much mental illnesses now, but again, it triggered it. One of the things I've learned or I have noticed in mediating, I did a lot of mediation during virtual mediation, and I did free sessions during the pandemic just to make sure that, families had an outlet to stay together and that kind of thing. So for about 3 months, 3 or 4 months, I conducted free on service virtual services for those families. And I found that there was a lot of family disputes, and they didn't know how to solve them because of the pandemic. And the best way that they felt that they could solve the problem was arguing and fighting and all of that. And so what I made them or help them understand what they need enrichment activities. Well, not necessarily outside of the home, but to create some, enrichment activities in the home that would allow them to be able to communicate better. I mean, puzzles, whatever, breathing, just techniques that they could use. And I'm mostly seeing anxiety, depression, and traumas, which is mostly what you see anyway. But each of these illnesses, we get caught up in a dark place, which apparently at that time was the pandemic. And we don't know how to get out of those dark places, and the pandemic served that dark place for us. And so, we're trying to get out of it, and that's how we feel what we can do it, by arguing, by fighting, by going through different things. And at that same time, it triggers some things on the inside of us. And like Jakob said, it caused us, brain functioning to realize that we were having issues and going through problems that we wouldn't ordinarily do. We were drained physically during the pandemic. It affected our mind, body, and our spirit. So that's a traumatic place to come out of. And so that's what I'm seeing, a lot of anxiety, depression, and trauma.
Thank you. Go ahead, Sasha.
No, these are all incredible responses, and there's still so much, again, stigma and so much holding us back from being able to support it. I remember something that really, really upset me was early on, there was a meme that went around. I don't know if you guys saw this or remember this, but it said, our parents were called to war. We were being asked to stay on our couch. It's kind of not a big deal type of thing. And it just goes to show that as much progress as we've made in mental health, we also still take this very shaming approach, like, oh, as long as it's not war or being on the front lines, then it's not a big deal. When really this was absolutely an enormous deal. Not people weren't sure whether airports would close down, whether they would see their families again, if they were going to die alone in a room without even being able to be surrounded by their loved ones. Obviously, I could go on and on and on, but it just goes to show that as much progress and improvement as we've made, there's so much and that we haven't, and that we still take this approach of making people feel like, oh, you should quit your whining and just buckle up. And I saw that from people who are even in the mental health field. And that was, to be honest, very destabilizing and scary to me. And yeah, I think there's so much PTSD. I notice even now that the pandemic is kind of waning and things are going back to normal, that I do have these lingering effects that a lot of other people are having. There was a time when I wasn't sure when I would see another human being, and it did bring up a lot of abandonment issues and things like that. And now that things have normalized and I know I'm going to see people, my body hasn't caught up to that yet. And so I'm still kind of in this panic, like, when am I going to have community? Am I going to have this? And I kind of have to keep reminding myself of that. So yeah, you guys have brought up so many incredible points. And of course, there's also that we are social creatures, and we know that there's studies show that you can actually heal from almost any illness better if you're physically with someone. If you're being held, you're going to heal. Literally, our bones will heal faster. And so I think for a lot of us, I'm personally not so much afraid of death, but I know that I'm afraid of being without, like, dying and being without support and community. So I think these are some very, very massive triggers that it's understandable that it's going to take us some time to figure out where we go from here.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sasha. That was great. And I just want to highlight a couple of points that you guys said and then move on into a conversation really about what's going on in these specific communities. So Dr. Tekia, I loved what you said in terms of the pandemic is really triggering past traumas, right? It's like that lack of feeling safety. And then this is basically taking away our foundation, which allows us to become more vulnerable to psychological issues, and our ability to tolerate has been definitely impacted. I know I could say mine has, and I'm sure everyone can share. And same thing with Dr. Rose, you made a good point to say there is a difference between mental illness and mental health. And I don't know if we recognize that, right? I don't know if the everyday individual really knows the difference there. And I appreciate all the work that you've been doing to, support families and moving away from like this arguing and bickering to finding different ways to engage within the home. And Sasha, this conversation that you brought up about so much stigma just holding us back. And I did actually see that meme, but I want to jump into something just to push this into a different parts of the conversation. I do want to jump into that same report, right? It said that mental health conditions are actually disproportionately affecting specific populations, specifically young adults, Hispanic persons, Black persons, essential workers, unpaid caregivers for adults, and those receiving treatment for pre-existing psychiatric conditions. As someone who works directly with African communities, as a person, an American has lived this experience, I can comfortably say that pre-COVID, our communities already struggled with the basic ideas and notions of mental health. In the Eritrean community, most of us, we don't have the language, the tools, the resources, or the specialists, or even the context to comprehend the full extent of what people actually go through day to day. We simply kind of label someone as crazy or sick. In our community, we kind of use sounds like, we'll be like, Michigan, stuff like that, right? It's a sign of sadness for the experience of what that person's going through, but it doesn't really add additional value to that person or supports them. So just in your practice, what are you guys seeing in these communities specifically? And can you speak about like some of the patterns, evolutions, and just belief systems of these communities that are actually damaging? I know, Sasha, you mentioned that meme, and prior to you saying that, I really didn't recognize that meme as just such a negative context, but now after you bringing this point up, it really makes a lot of sense for me. But I'd love, Dr. Roach, for you to start us off, especially since you work within the communities and like these one-on-one sessions.
Yeah, so are you asking to find out what they're doing, or what exactly? My internet was going in and out.
No worries. So my question is, what are the patterns, the evolutions, and the belief systems in these communities that are actually damaging them? And you can talk from any of the communities that we've listed: young adults, Hispanic persons, Black persons, essential workers, unpaid caregivers, and those who are already dealing with pre-existing psychiatric conditions.
Okay, for me, I've dealt primarily for the first 6 months during the or the last 6 months during the pandemic. I dealt with a lot of couples, and that's what I was mediating. And most of them, first of all, they didn't believe that there were any traumas going on in their home. They didn't believe there was a therapy. They don't believe that. They just simply think that the pandemic, they were in the house and they're just having normal problems. But what they didn't realize is that those problems was escalating, and it was making them either want to leave the home. Then, you heard a lot of couples that wanted to deal with the divorce right during the pandemic, and not realizing that there were actually triggers again that was affecting their relationships. But you have a lot of people that feel they don't need it. They don't feel that anything is wrong except just the pandemic. And so when I see people come into my office or come into on the virtual call, they're ready to just believe that if I just have an opportunity to go back out and do the same things I've done before, that's it. I don't need anything else. I don't need therapy, which is a dangerous move, because you see a lot of people who are crying frequently. They have a loss of energy, loss of appetite, but that doesn't trigger anything for them in terms of wanting or needing therapy. So the identification role of sleeping too much, indecisiveness, all of that. Those are things that does not appear to be depressive states. So it's hard to get through sometime to make people understand that it is hard to chisel through those thoughts if you don't believe anything is wrong. And so that's been my challenge for the last, 6 months, is chiseling through the thought pattern, helping people understand why they need the therapy or why they need an intervener. Actually, it didn't even have to be a therapist. So that's what I've seen in the community. And that's because I work with couples during that time. Now, I do want to say that I've worked with young people for a long time, for about 45 years. However, I haven't had the opportunity during the pandemic to really get them on the calls and all of that. I think what was more important during the pandemic was to deal with the entire family, but first the head of that family, which is the husband and wife. So at this point with Next Gen, we will deal directly with our youth and young adults, which is more of where I understand they are. And but that's the issue right now. People don't really believe it. They don't think they're in danger. They don't think that it's going anywhere. You have very few couples who believe. Normally it's the wife, but it's chiseling through.
Thank you. Sasha or Dr. Tekia?
I can go. I think it kind of touched a lot of things, as Dr. Rod was saying. I see different patterns depending on the population. You know, when I'm working with young adults, a lot of my clients at the University of Pennsylvania are, young Black men, for most part, even in my private practice. I think there is a lot of awareness issues with the mental health concerns. For example, somebody very athletic, very smart, outstandingly smart, comes in and talks about, how uncomfortable he feels, like to walk around campus, like during the pandemic, the tight chest, pains, that he can breathe. It kind of resembles, some anxiety, but he never used the word anxiety itself. And after describing all the symptoms, I'm like, that sounds like more of social anxiety. And he was like shocked, like, no, I can't be, anxious.
Absolutely.
And that shows the stigma that he is carrying, like this discrimination that he's been building on, that he was taught, Sasha was talking about it earlier, that you have to be tough. You can't show, any kind of weakness, especially, and I'm not trying to be discriminating on gender here, but a lot of Black men has been taught never to show any weakness. Otherwise, it becomes risky for them. They become vulnerable. But if I shift on the other side of the community that I've been working on, especially the immigrant community, I think there's a lot of layers that make it, really difficult for them. First one, as I was saying, is the stigma and discrimination that they've been carrying on before the pandemic. So when something hits them, it became really difficult to get out of that comfort zone and seek help. Even to normalize that, when I'm struggling with appetite or feeling sad to struggle, to get out of bed, what language would I use? Would I use that I'm feeling sad and depressed, or would I use like, oh, something, physically is, going on, or even put it on God or something. But the other part, which has been, I think, more problematic that the country is not addressing fully, is the economic and immigration issues. A lot of people of color and immigrants has been working on paycheck to paycheck. So they can't stop or they can't stay home. I mean, because of my educational background and privilege, I was just working from this computer, like I didn't have to meet anybody. I didn't have to put myself at risk. But a lot of my family members, they can't afford to do that. So they have to go, and they are carrying the fear, the anxiety with them every day when they are going out and then when they are coming back. This is exhausting. This is really quite tiring, like to get into that moment. But would they associate it with anxiety, or would they associate it with some other, issues? But the third part that I was struggling with is the resources. Generally, like in terms of the mental health issues, a lot of immigrants and people of color, we don't have the resources to see a therapist, not only the awareness or the openness, but even the resources. I'm a Black male psychologist, and God knows how many calls I get every day from all age groups, just because of my race, because of my identity at this point. The skills and other things is another part, but it shows like how much like that is scarce, and that makes it really difficult. So I kind of felt like for people of color and immigrants in general during this pandemic, it wasn't only the pandemic, but a number of layers has been hitting them, day in, day out. And then you bring that to your home, which Dr. Rod was talking about, like it gets in between you, like, between you and your partner. You kind of get into conflict, you don't know how to address it. You might not even think that it is the stress that's causing this conflict, not necessarily that, the difference between the two of you. And if people are not equipped with the skills that they need to learn how to communicate, or my favorite thing, time out. Like if we are getting into conflict, I'm gonna take a walk and I will come back and then we'll talk. But we don't get to that level. And as a result, you become more victim and get caught up in that cycle. So I kind of feel like, with all these issues, the pandemic is an umbrella that we are using, but I think there is a lot within that has been still going on, not new, but kind of got exposed, at the moment.
Yeah, again, this is all so thoughtful and presenting so much just nuance and layers to this conversation. And then, of course, another outstanding one that's been touched upon, but I guess just to go a little bit further, is obviously the social justice issues that are intertwined with this. I mean, one of the things, there's this double-edged sword. I'm so glad that we're talking about mental health more. But on the other hand, we talk about it in the ways we talk about a lot of other things, which is in this it's a personal problem, it's an individual problem, and we don't talk about things in a systemic and collective problem. And how really one of the focuses on my organization was to address also, sexism and racism and privilege and all of that, because there is no mental health without understanding of how we're being, discriminated against, how we're being, siloed, how we face different adversity in our lives. And so that's one of the things that I'm trying to get people to be more aware of, and especially the gaslighting that goes on for communities of color. You had George Floyd and everything happening with the protests happening while we're at home sitting on our couches, and you're having pundits every day go on television, being upset that buildings are being burnt down without acknowledging that buildings are being burnt down because lives are being taken. And a building can be rebuilt, but the person's lives can't be. And so, and of course, and then these communities are gaslit for that. Why are you so angry? Why are you out there? And so there's this constant bombardment without an accurate acknowledgement of, hey, our society, the other element of it is our society is based on a lot of toxic and abusive norms that, like Dr. Sandra was talking about. It's like individually, we don't see there's a problem, but collectively, we don't see, hey, we built a society that's not made for you to flourish. The goals are productivity, efficiency, do all these things, but it's not take care of yourself, be sensitive, be compassionate, be empathetic, learn. I talk about this a lot. I still, to this day, I've been out of school over a decade, and I still remember the quadratic formula and the Pythagorean theorem, but nobody taught me how to have self-confidence, how to have self-love, how to navigate conflict in a healthy way where it's not just screaming and blaming and shaming. And these are all things that we're not talking about collectively. There's, we all point to, like Trump and all these problems, but we don't point to how we all have that within us and we're all contributing that, and that we're in a system that is encouraging us to be like that. You know, the number one job title for sociopaths is CEO. There's so many aspects of our culture that encourages this me, myself, and I, you know, screw everyone else, like don't pay attention. Because and so I think people need to shut down for society to perpetuate and be this way, and to start to open up and awaken yourself is to see a lot of injustice and a lot of pain and a lot of hurt. And that in turn takes a lot of resilience. And how do I sit with that without going into other coping mechanisms? So again, these are such complex issues. And I think as much as I love how much, you know, we're talking about mental health and how it's like going to the gym and doing all this stuff, I also wish we were talking about, hey, we have built a system that's not built for our collective and individual thriving. And for that to happen, we really, you know, some bigger things really need to change too.
Thank you, Sasha. Man, I have to say that sort of the conversation is so deep because you guys pulled out so many things that I don't know if we really tackle them or understand them. So I want to summarize a little bit of what you guys said. Dr. Rode, I think what I pulled from your part of the conversation was that a lot of us don't even know that we have an issue, right? Like we don't recognize that there is something going on. I know I've had moments where I was sleeping too much. I was very indecisive. Would I say something's going on? Probably not. It might be like, I'm stressed, I'm tired, and moving on, right? And so it's sometimes so hard. I love how you say we just have to, you know, get through sometimes to get people to actually chisel through those patterns and recognize that they need someone to get involved, like, you know, even if it's not a therapist, but an intervener. And I think that's so important. Dr. Tekia, when you mentioned, you pulled out so many different things, but you know, it's the language. I don't know if we even have the language. Do we even know the language, right? So when Sasha was saying gaslighting, I don't even know how many people know to use gaslighting as a language to, you know, express what they're going through, or, you know, saying I have anxiety, or even feel comfortable to say that stigma. And especially in the immigrant community, this pre-existing trauma that's constantly like we go out with it and then we come back home with it. And then now it starts to play a role within the relationships, whether it's with our kids, our friends, our family members, or a significant other. You know, when you said, what language do I use? Sometimes I'm not sure I even know what language, so I can imagine what everybody else feels. And just, you know, being exhausted, the resources, we just don't have all of these like awareness and resources. So thank you for that. Sasha, I love that you pulled together the social justice piece and that our society, and I love that you say that our society is actually not built for us to thrive. It's built for us to produce, but it's not here for us to thrive mentally, emotionally, and socially. And I think that's something that I don't know we all kind of connect, right? We don't connect that piece of the mental health conversation in a lot of ways. So I wanted to kind of dive into a different part of the conversation, which is something you're still building on, which is the stigma, right? In the last 5 years, we're actually seeing a shift in culture with prominent and cultural creators shifting the narrative around mental health. And again, Sasha, based on what you said, I'm not sure we're all the way there, obviously, right? But I noticed that the radio host and creator like Charlemagne the God wrote a book called Shook One, which I actually read, and it focuses on his struggle with mental health anxiety. And he has been on the front line in saying it's okay that I have a mental health issue and that I am seeing a therapist. I feel like when I watch the Breakfast Club, he's constantly asking, do you see a therapist? Which helps to normalize this experience, especially in the Black community, right? And in the urban community, and asking artists and whoever he interviews, like, are you really okay, right? In addition, we're actually seeing other actors and activists like Taraji P. Henson and others creating foundation, podcasts, mental health courses, you know, different apps around depression, anxiety, disorders. I've seen more and more resources, a lot more than I've ever seen in the past, which is great. So I actually want to start with this question, right? Like, one, what are the stigmas and how can we change it so it becomes a healthier and more normal to speak about our issues without all these fears? And then the second part is like, what do we need more of and what do we need less of? And I actually want to start with Sasha, if you can kind of jump in there.
Yeah, I mean, I can't stress enough how important it is to see other people leading the way, especially other people who look like us and come from, you know, our communities. I think there is nothing quite like that. I found it really interesting that you know, again, part of my story was I was worried about so much shame that I thought I had to keep it a secret, and I decided to go the opposite direction. And, you know, now I talk about it everywhere I go. And it's really interesting because people come up to me and they're like, wow, you know, you really changed this space. Thank you for doing that. And one thing I have to remind them of is like, nobody elected me president of the sharing club. Like, I just made a decision one day that I didn't want to keep perpetuating the stigma, and I chose to talk about it. And as a result, like, that's what Change Place is. So you have that power every day, every space that you walk into, you know, instead of continuing this dialogue of how are you, I'm good, how are you, I'm good, when you're really not, and covering it all up, to say, you know, I'm actually not doing so great. I'm having a really rough time. And, you know, you can be mindful of people say, you know, maybe you know, maybe they're in a tough space and maybe they don't have that capacity. But it's crazy how just something that simple of being the first one to admit that you're not okay can really open the door for everyone else. I run a workshop called Small Talk Sucks, and there are a lot of studies that show that a lot of us hate small talk, and yet almost all of us continue to perpetuate it. And it's because nobody wants to be the first mover, right? Because that's a very risky and vulnerable position to put yourself in. However, the thing is that most of the time that's actually being rewarded, and especially in today's climate, people are looking for somebody who is going to keep it real, is going to actually talk about it. And even if, you know, I think initially there can be some kind of discomfort and backlash, but that's part of it, is for us to get comfortable being uncomfortable. Because I would say that 90% of the conversations worth having are conversations that are going to make us feel out of our zone and not really sure exactly what we're doing to embark on that. But that's the point. That's where we need to be, is to start to, like, oh gosh, this yucky feeling inside, this icky feeling inside, I don't know how to navigate it, to normalize even that. Like, that's human, that's normal. You don't have to have all the right responses and to know what you're saying and to know how to navigate it. But, you know, can we kind of have some grace and compassion for each other while we navigate some tough minefields, and not being, you know, not being afraid to go first.
Dr. Rhodes, you're on mute. Thank you, Sasha.
Okay, so I guess when I was about 28, I had to attend therapy as well. And it was a big deal at that time. I was afraid to talk about it. I didn't want anybody to know that I was in a space where I would have to go to therapy. And at that time, it was a hidden conversation. And one of the things that bothered me the most about that, the fact that I was not able to say it openly or was not able to tell people, it made my condition worse, because there are times you just want to not necessarily be in front of a therapist, but to actually just talk. And so what I did, what I do now, I'm the first person to decide that when we're in a conversation with someone we know that are going through, I'm the first person to tell my story. And I think people are ready to hear the truth. They want to know if we actually have gone through this process, what we think about. And so I'm the first person in the conversation that will come out with my story, tell the truth, be real about it. And that seems to comfort people when they know that you've gone through the same thing and it's not something that should be hidden or whatever. The other thing that I do in the organization that I found that was very helpful is to walk alongside these people on their journey and during their journey, just kind of like walking with them as they struggle, and not, you know, say to them, well, do this and do that, but come on, let's do this together. And I think that has been the best way that I've been able to experience positive results, is actually to just walk along with the people. Now, that doesn't mean that I can do that all the time, but I have a staff that we taught to do that. When someone comes in, or when you meet someone that has that issue, We're not going to say you know you have a mental illness, or let's just start the conversation and find out where they are and just basically be honest, even if you've done it as well. And then let's walk them through. It's almost like a baby stepping thing, so that then they can open up. Because a lot of times, just because someone says I'm not feeling well, still does not indicate that they feel that they need therapy, or they feel they need counseling, or any of the above. But more so, the fact that they just feel I'm worried, or again, putting it on pandemic. But before even the pandemic, there was nothing that they really could say, I put it on. So it was a thing where I just don't feel that I'm that way. But I think in these days, I think we have to be more concerned. We appear to be inhuman. And I think we have to just to come together and, you know, hold each other accountable, love each other in a way where we're able to tell the truth as well as accept who they are.
I want to share a little bit different, not totally different, but a different perspective. With your question, what is stigma? You know, my mind went back many years back to Eritrea. Just to give you some background, Eritrea has been engaged in war for 30 plus years, you know, for independence. And then after that, there was, you know, like border conflict and all those things. So many years ago, me and my colleagues, we went to one of the higher officials, you know, to ask, you know, like if we can study the trauma that, you know, the people have endured, you know, like 30 years of war is unbelievably long. And the answer was like, no, Eritreans don't get trauma. We don't get traumatized. It was totally dismissed. It's like shocking for someone, you know, who would understand that. But the most interesting thing for me was many years later, when I came to the US, the people brought that kind of feeling with them. So when we were talking about, you know, like mental health issue, in addition to what they have survived during the war, and the migration has its own impact, the adjustment, the acculturation has its own impact, but still people were generally saying like, no, depression is white people's problem. We don't get depressed, we don't get traumatized. And this brings, you know, like to the question, not to get into conflict, you know, no, everybody gets depressed, everybody, you know, gets, you know, traumatized. It's not that all of us are immune. But when we step it back to understand where this understanding or, you know, approach is coming from, the interesting thing is that their understanding is black and white. If you are stressed, then you are insane. Otherwise, you are healthy. And you would see this in their own household. If you are eating well, if you are sleeping well, you can't say that, you know, school is stressful and I'm anxious. No, you are eating well, you are sleeping fine, you can stand, go to school, you're good. There is no in between that people could understand it. And we went on to deeply, you know, like understand these situations, especially for parents, that if they accept, you know, like their child or themselves or any family member is struggling with some mental health issue, then automatically they start to point to themselves that they failed as a parent, which is, I think, a painful feeling for a parent to think that they failed as a parent. So all this, you know, internal feeling overwhelms them. They shut you down right away before you even talk about it. So for me, it kind of comes in, you know, both at an individual level, but also collectively how we approach it. I'm quite optimistic now, and I'm really grateful for all my community and, you know, like the African community, especially that I work with. 5 years ago when I was doing all these workshops, and now it's really stark difference. Now people are opening up saying like, what you're talking about is exactly my son, or that's me, you know, like 10 years ago. I didn't know what I was dealing with. So there is a lot of struggle that comes in, you know. What we need more is this courage, vulnerability to share. But the other person who is listening also to learn to listen, not to judge. So there is a lot of painful and punishing words that we use with regard to mental health, but not more accepting words. And this is something that we were talking about, you know, like when someone is coming to you, I'm not feeling well, step back and ask, Are you okay? Is there anything that I can do for you? Do we need to call to someone? It's fine, we don't need, to talk to a psychiatrist and get medication, but we can just do consultation. So the listener has to really do some, heavy lifting to help the other person. Otherwise, if I'm, hearing Sasha saying something and I go to Helen and say like, oh, did it hurt? Sasha is, going through this and that. How am I going to be able to open up and share? But the last part that that I really like about Dr. Rod was sharing is that in the nonprofit, the Lions Story that I'm part of, we use a lot of narrative therapy and mindfulness to help individuals who are trauma survivors due to racism and other factors. We help them take control of their story, take control of their narratives. But in order to do that, we help them process the feelings in their body. We just don't focus on, like the story or, whatever, intellectualizing it. No, let's experience and take control how we are feeling right now. And we can process the trauma that we've been carrying on for whatever generation, not only, right now. And that makes a big difference. People say like, yeah, every time, I want to say something, I choke. But the moment you teach them this magnificent, simple breathing exercise, it allows them to let it go. So I think there is a lot of, resources that we can bring in and share. But if we can drop the judgment, if we can drop, like this punishing language and open up more to listen and support, I think stigma has no chance to survive.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. And I do want to just kind of highlight again what you said, because I do think it's so important. I want to pull it to the front. Sasha, when you just talked about, I feel like when you talked about sharing our story, and I think all of you said that, right? Like how important it is to share the story and to actually make a decision and own that power and be that first mover, right? I didn't really look at it as an uncomfortable place to be. And I love your session on small talk does suck, because it does suck, right? It doesn't really add as much value, but just normalizing these conversations, having the grace and compassion. You all mentioned, we need more concern, more togetherness, as Dr. Rhodes said, right? Accepting who they are and then showing up and being present with them and walking that walk with them. And Dr. Atekia, as an Eritrean, I definitely agree, that conversation of like Eritreans don't experience trauma is very much still alive and well. And I'm so happy to see it's not just Eritreans, like the continent of Africa and so many parts of the world have experienced long-term trauma that I'm not sure if we actually have begun to process it. But what I do want to say is that you talked about just dropping the judgment and dropping that punishing language, and that's so important. And we do need less of that, and instead taking control and dealing with that and processing it and making sure that it leaves our body so we can actually heal. So thank you guys, because I did take notes that there is a lot we can do, right? I think we kind of think like, oh, well, I can't do anything, but we can show up for someone and show up in an honest, helpful way versus in a judging, abusive way in some contexts, right? So I want to ask Sasha, really quickly, like I read an article that you published chronicling your experience with mental health and how your organization, A Beautiful Mess, was actually created. So what struck me the most in your story was how you had the courage to, one, check yourself into a mental health hospital, two, share what you just went through with 100 family and friends via email, and just like the amazing experiences that they responded with. And then two, you had the audacity, courage, and the mindfulness to create this organization. So can you talk about why you shared your story with so many people and where did that courage actually come from, even as you're dealing with it, right? Because it's such a powerful example of what we're capable of, even in the darkest of times.
Yeah. I think there's this notion that we need to be ready for something or have the courage to do something even, or that I know that I felt for a long time that people that started organizations or businesses or I don't know, just did anything that I desired to do were somehow stronger or more capable than me, or any number of things. And I remember Michelle Obama, I still like, it's so vivid when she talked about, you know, I've had a seat at every major table in the world, and trust me, they're not that smart. And I worked in some pretty accomplished spaces with some pretty accomplished people. And in retrospect, I was like, you know, they don't have anything different. They're just willing to put themselves out there and either make an ass out of themselves or make mistakes or fall fast or fall forward and all of that. So really it's like, you know, if they can do it, I can do it. And again, this idea that you're ready for it. I don't think I've ever been ready for it. But what I did realize is that I don't have to be ready for it. I don't have to have the courage in this moment. I can pray that it's going to come to me and I can just live a life according to my principles, which is that I knew that mental health stigma was so strong, and I knew that it had nearly broken me many times in my life, and I knew that I didn't want that to continue. And so, and I also knew the only way it's going to change is if something different happens. And so, I mean, I still to this day remember typing it on the keyboard and the sweats and the feelings of nausea and just, I mean, it really felt like I was going to die doing it. And that's another thing is, you know, our evolutionary brain, we are wired to be any new stimulus or anything that scares us is going to kill us, because that's how it was on the savannah and for most of human history, right? And so part of it is pressing that keyboard in that moment, and there may not be a tiger about to eat me, but my body actually doesn't know the difference. And so part of what I'm training myself to do is when I feel this overwhelming fear, when I feel, it's kind of like Jakob was talking about with your throat closing up, part of what we're training ourselves to do is to notice that that is happening in the first place, and then to not let that dictate and drive our actions and what we do. It's not that I'm somebody who's just been comfortable sharing my story from the start. I mean, it's funny now that people tell me, wow, thank you for sharing, that's so vulnerable. Because now it doesn't feel vulnerable at all. I've talked about it so many times that I could be talking about like watching a movie or like washing my hair. But in the beginning, it was my biggest fear. It was absolutely catastrophic. Every time I did it, felt like my life was like on the verge of ending. And then I just kept showing up anyway, despite that feeling. Those feelings were still there, and I just kept doing it. And then over time, my body starts to learn, oh, you're not going to die. This isn't an existential threat. Like, you're going to be okay. And so part of what, and I talk about this a lot, is turning your red lights into yellow lights and your yellow lights possibly into green. You don't have to go to green, but just because your body or your mind is screaming no, you can notice that and observe it. And you can have, I'm a very scared person actually, but I think people who meet me think I'm fearless, and to me that's comical. It's not that I'm fearless, it's just that what I choose to do with that fear is to let it be a fuel instead of something where I stop and panic, which I used to, by the way. I used to just utterly shut down. I used to rip my hair out for hours at a time. I was so debilitated. And now it's kind of like, oh my gosh, I feel that overwhelming fear that's like that shutdown fear. And it's kind of like, I made a choice of how I'm going to live, and I'm going to keep pushing. And then eventually you acclimate. So again, I can't underscore how important discomfort is. I think we're constantly running away from it, and we have so many distractions and so many ways to do that. But I would say if there's one thing to pinpoint that I think could be one of the biggest catalysts for changes, is that if we could all find a way to be more comfortable being uncomfortable, the conversations and the spaces that opens up for us is some of the richest, most beautiful soil for a new way to be built. It's actually incredibly humbling for me to even think about it. So yeah, it's you know, don't expect to be fearless, don't expect it to be easy, just make the choice and do it anyway. And find allies, people like the ones in this space who are going to, because there are going to be critics no matter what you do, but finding the people who understand what you stand for, and who appreciate that and respect that and are living that authentically themselves, that is invaluable.
Thank you. That was really rich. Dr. Tekia or Dr. Rode, if you want to add anything, feel free. You're on mute, Dr. Rode.
Speaking behind Sasha, I love what you said about, just going out there. One of the things that I have experienced, and I think a lot of people probably feel the same way, that I'm fearless, I'll do anything. They have no idea that during the time that I was in therapy, it has always been the opposite. And that was one of the things I went to therapy for, was the fact that I was so afraid because of the fact that my family used to say I would never be anything. And so that destroyed my life. The reason that I do things now, what drives me and what keeps me moving, is the fact that if my story can help somebody, I'm going to do it. It doesn't matter whether it makes me feel uncomfortable or not, but that is based on, do you love what you're doing enough to love people enough to get in a space where it doesn't matter whether or not you feel uncomfortable? And so I totally agree with you. I am definitely not a fearless person. I am, I may appear to be that way, that I can do this and I'll do that, but deep down inside, I am sometimes so scared. But the love for people, the love for what I do, drives me to a point where it doesn't matter one way or the other. Let's just do it. Let's just jump in there. And I think the whole thing is that when you make a decision, then the decision becomes you. And you go out there and you do whatever's necessary. So I'm really proud of you, Sasha, that you just took the leap, and it doesn't matter, the fact that it puts you in an uncomfortable space.
One of the things that I ask myself a lot of times is, if I would go back in time, I think I would want to be as courageous as Sasha has been sharing, because that fear that I've been holding on, that anxiety that I've been holding on, even though my mind is saying a lot, my body is stuck, and that has been really problematic. And still, when someone is saying, they don't get anxious, they don't get scared or something, they worry me, like that worries me. I say that, like, people say, oh, you're calm or something, like, yeah, I'm calm on the outside, but I'm like a swimming duck. Inside of me, like it's something else. But I made a decision to negotiate with my own anxiety and neutralize that. Every time when I'm dealing with anything that triggers me, I have to neutralize it before I internalize it. And that makes a big difference for me. Otherwise, if I am, stuck in that, it becomes my reality. And whatever, any kind of workshops that I do, I always talk about the neurobiology of anxiety and trauma, how the brain works, exactly what Sasha was talking about. If we think that it is a very scary thing, the limbic system is going to be activated because it's a survival brain. You need either to run or, fight or flight, concepts that we talk about. But if I stuck there and aware how my body is feeling, automatically I'm sending this look to my brain saying that it is okay. I'm not afraid of it. Yes, I need to be careful. I need to be probably on the yellow, light, but I'm not afraid. And we know that a lot of research is coming now that shows the moment you recognize this feeling, the sadness, anger, frustration, it becomes less impactful. And it allows the rest of the brain, to be activated to address, what you're dealing with. This is something that I remind myself every day. Sometimes, my body takes over and my heartbeat, starts, to react. And I say, like, okay, take that deep breath.
Oh, yeah.
Slow it down. And I do that. And I can see that my heartbeat decreases from 70, 80, because usually it is low, by 10, 15, beats, per minute. And that's really a lot of resources that we have. And I really want to highlight here what Dr. Ward was sharing earlier. I'm a therapist and I'm a psychologist, and I really believe in therapy. But I also strongly believe that there is a lot of resources within us that we can use.
Mhm.
There's a lot of resources around us that we can use, including the simple breathing, that makes a lot of difference. That allows your body saying like, there is no giant tiger, coming to eat you. It's just your feelings to recognize that you're okay, you're fine, and you will be fine. And that allows us, to get to a level where we can, empower ourselves or even reach out somebody, like I do that every time I'm feeling stuck or lost. I have very few people that I reach out, and I feel great, and I feel on top of the world. And that takes me, like as far as I need to. And there are moments that I'm gonna dip a little bit too. That's okay. And then, like I'm gonna reach out. So I think this really makes a big difference, and the vulnerability is really a superpower.
Thank you. Thank you guys. That was really helpful and really important. I think you made some points that I want to highlight again. The first part, Sasha, is like, when I'm reading it from a third party perspective, right, from an outsider, you're like, wow, this person has so much courage amidst such, a chaotic time internally and externally. And it's like, we just look at the courage. We don't recognize that you got past it by just doing. I think a lot of times we feel like, I can't be like her. But the reality is like what you said, Michelle Obama has said, and I totally agree. I sit in some interesting spaces, and the people to my left and to my right are a lot older than me sometimes, more degrees, more this and more that. And I'm always like, why am I sitting in this room? Or like, I can't do this. And it is that greater purpose for me of why I'm in that room that pushes me even in the midst of fear or anything else.
Mhm.
So thank you guys, both Dr. Rode and Sasha, for sharing your stories around that. Because I do think it's important that we do know that even if our brain, like Dr. Tekke and Sasha said, even if our brain is like feeling this crisis, that if we just do, because it really isn't the end, right? Like, we're not dying, but we think we're dying. And I think people need to understand that moving from like red light to yellow light to slowly eventually getting to a green light where we can share these comfortably is really helpful. And just being able to be uncomfortable in our uncomfort. And I think this, we build a narrative in the US especially of this fearlessness, right? Like, be fearless, be a girl boss, be a boss. That's something I hear constantly. And I'm like, but being a boss is nothing but chaos and fear. But you just have to keep going. Thank you, Dr. Rowe, for just really bringing us to that point that like, you have to love what you do. You have to like have a deep kind of like impacted why, like, why are you doing this? What's the purpose? To be able to move past those fears. And Dr. Tekke, when you talked about that mind-body connection, I think we forget. I recently heard that in order to stabilize yourself and bring yourself to present, you do have to breathe, because you're sitting in a space and in a situation and your mind is somewhere else and your body might be physically here, but you're not fully connected. And just being able to use, breathing exercises to just concentrate back here is so important. So I want to end on this side of the conversation with one last question, and then I want to move into kind of like, how do we talk about resources, right? You guys share so many awesome resources, but I want people to be able to take away things from it that they can maybe jot down for themselves. So my last question in this part of the conversation is, I'm going to go back to that report, just because I think that report really brings us back into what's going on with COVID and like how the pandemic is this bigger umbrella, like you said, Dr. Tekke. And so the report actually outcomes says that the public health response to COVID-19 pandemic should increase intervention and prevention efforts to address associated mental health conditions. So community level efforts, including mental health or health communication strategies, should also prioritize these groups, right? The essential workers, the young adults, the racial ethnic minorities. What I want to ask you guys is, who needs to be part of that change? Like, who are the people that need to be part of this conversation? And what have you seen in your work that has actually altered community health in a positive direction? So maybe Dr. Tekke, if you can kick us off.
Absolutely. I think there is a lot of loaded issue with that question, when we ask, who do we need to consult with? Who needs to, create this frame? And without going far, I haven't lived long in this country to say I know a lot, but I have seen a lot of, white men deciding for women, and a lot of white men deciding for Black women. That is bizarre. That's disturbing. When it comes to policies, that's where we're asking, like, if we are talking about mental health issues, consult first with the people, not even the experts. Talk to the people and listen, to what's going on with them and understand what's happening. And then you come to experts and say, like, this is what's going on. How do you understand it? How do you help it? And even now, I mean, I'm part of Penn. Penn is one of the top Ivy League schools, a very giant, really rich school. Still, we go through similar situation where they bring experts who or doesn't have much expertise in mental health, and they are trying to shift the organizational structure of a mental health center, talking to psychologists and psychiatrists. It's like really an awful approach. Somebody coming in who doesn't have any background trying to teach you about how to do your work. But for me, like, if we are concerned about people, let's start with the humanity. Let's start, like, with the basic needs. What do you need? And if we truly want to address that, then people are going to tell you what they need. If you have ears, listen to what they are saying, and they are going to tell you how you can really help them. In a similar way, I truly believe in prevention, not only intervention, but the prevention aspect of it. And my biggest advocacy is to teach parents and children, to teach parents how to understand themselves and how to help their children, but also to help children how to express their needs, whatever is going on. Especially for children, they can experience anxiety, but they don't understand anxiety. There is a developmental question here. And when it comes, with these basic needs, then we can shift the community. Otherwise, if it is coming from the top and the system is trying to tell you how you're supposed to function, for me, that's oppression, that's colonization. And I really, find it quite, awfully disturbing to come to a community and say, like, hey, you are struggling with racial issue, this is what you need to do. That is a very wrong approach, I think. But as I was saying, like, to anyone that I work with, of course, we have a lot of expertise that we can bring in, but I really do not want to pretend that I know exactly what this community is going through. Even if I'm an immigrant myself, even if I'm a Black male myself, even if I have been going through a lot of racial issues in this country, I can't pretend that I know what this person is going through in all these aspects. So I have to have the ears to listen and then start there.
I just want to follow up with Yakam. I do totally agree with you that we have to ask the person. I think that what's important in this whole arena is prevention. A lot of what I believe is we should have more community events that speak to people's self-esteem, self-worth before we even look at the idea that, oh, they may need a therapist, they may not need a therapist. I've learned, and my experience has been that whenever I deal with or have a big audience of events of with women or children or mothers or whoever, and when you begin to ask them, what do they need, how they feel, and pretty much they're open at that point, you get a sense of knowing whether or not they may or may need therapy. But what's important is to find out how you're going to get through to them to make them understand or help them understand that maybe they need to go further than just being in an event talking about their issues and sort of walking away feeling that type of way. So I've found out that most of my success of helping people get to from point one to point two, and that is from prevention to actually getting into therapy, is to allow them to say exactly what's wrong and to deal with the self-esteem, deal with the issues that they're presently, facing. And then not necessarily bring in an expert therapist or anything like that, but pretty much give them some information that will take them further than just an event or talk or sisterhood or whatever the case may be. So I think the prevention is more important than anything as before it's intervention involving therapists or bringing someone in. And again, that's that 101, that caring atmosphere, that safe atmosphere that allow people to really say how they are, what they're doing, what they're feeling. And that is what mental health is all about: my emotions, my thoughts, what I feel, what I want to do, what I can't do. And so that's the prevention part. Let's deal with that issue first.
It's funny because a lot of people, when they come to me, they ask, what is it that I need to learn? What is it that I need to do? And a lot of what I say is it's actually less about what you need to learn and more about what you need to unlearn. Because actually kids, even if they don't have like the awareness of what's going on, they're actually very, very emotionally intelligent and intelligent on so many levels. And then what we begin to do when we socialize them is to shame them and to tell them, which emotions are okay, which is not okay, what your family wants you to do, what we expect of you, what we want. And so, yeah, I'm really glad that you guys are talking about getting a very early start and starting. Again, I'm not trying to dissuade math education when I say this at all, but I will say in my daily life right now, I certainly use emotional intelligence way more than I use the Pythagorean theorem. And there's absolutely no reason or no excuse when we know as much as we do know that this isn't part of our curriculum. This should be just the foundation for our society at large. So I think weirdly enough, like we could be listening to kids. I really shared Jakob's sentiment at how absurd I think it is that we have people who don't belong to communities telling them who and what they should be thinking and doing. And this is also something that I think gets misinterpreted and that I fear talking about a little bit because I don't want this to be interpreted as a stance that I'm anti-expertise at all, because I think it's so important to have people who are knowledgeable and educated. But what I will say is that a lot of the worst people I dealt with in my experience were old white men with PhDs. And I would take somebody who's skilled and humble at listening over somebody with a degree almost any day. And again, having people who look like us and can certainly relate to us at the very least. I mean, I do think a problem in the mental health field is unfortunately how many people look like me who are white and white women, and I think can't necessarily communities of color face specific experiences and traumas, and they could be sometimes better served by somebody who's more familiar with that. I would love to highlight a resource. A friend of mine, Eric Colley, he runs Ayana Therapy, which is, I think, the largest network of BIPOC therapists. And he's also trying to change the way we view therapy a bit so that it's less about the credential and the degree, and more it's somebody who is going to really be able to listen and connect with you. But yeah, I think we really underestimate the healing power of real presence. And I don't mean just listening, but just being able to show up in a room, in a space with somebody and not patronize them, not tell them to, get a gratitude journal or that they should be positive or, all these things, but to really give them the gift of your full attention and awareness and empathy. I think that's one of the most healing things that there is. And I think that if people felt heard, we would see a radically different world.
If I may add a little bit to that, Helen, before you jump in, a couple of other things that my colleagues here sharing is that I have seen a study, it has been a long time, that the average time that it takes, for a person to see a therapist in this country is about 10 years. It's a decade. And that's really problematic. Of course, it shows about the lack of resources, the stigma and other things, but how much, this person has been carrying on their own because of a number of reasons. And by the time they reach out to see, like a therapist is when it reaches chronic level or something like that. And that's really important to, to understand. And I find it really critical because when you approach people of color, marginalized groups, immigrants, and all that becomes more problematic. We know that when it comes to mental health issues, it is not, long ago that mostly Black women started to get into the field of psychology. It was mostly Black men and some, white women. And now we are starting, to dive into that a little bit more. I don't think we are at a level where we have enough resources at all. But I still think that, we don't have to only go to a therapist because, that's the only way. No, there are a number of other reasons and resources that we can address it, especially if you understand the community, they have their own way of healing. We can help them with that, whatever that is. And that's, I think, where the beauty of diversity and the richness of culture could be really helpful. Otherwise, if we are waiting until the last minute, we know how problematic that is. But I think every community has a lot of resources to bring the healing to themselves. And if we can help them with the resources or even some guidance, I think would be really magical.
Thank you, guys. So what I took away from all that, which was a lot too, this is such an excellent conversation, is I do recognize that what you all mentioned, which is having that community speak for itself, but then also asking them, right? Like asking them what's going on, what their needs are, and not being a representative of their needs, right? Just hearing it from them. We see that in the community building side of it, even in the communities we work with, whether they're African diaspora communities or African communities back home or any of the other community groups we work with, we find there is this kind of like contradiction conversation of organizations coming in and saying, you need water wells or you need this, versus asking, what do you need? And the results and the sustainability is so much different. And I definitely see that in the mental health space. So thank you guys for saying that. But then the prevention piece is so important that you all brought up as like a key critical component of what we need more of, that one-on-one caring and safe atmosphere that you said, Dr. Rowe, that we really need to allow to exist so that healing can actually happen. And Sasha, as you talked about, just I do think we underestimate, well, what you said, the healing power of that real authentic presence, that gift of that full attention and that awareness and full empathy. It's a practice, and I don't know if we have all of the resources to even be able to practice that and live that out. And Dr. Tekke, you did mention this 10 years, and I was thinking about when you said it takes somebody 10 years. I'm just now in my late 30s hearing my friends in my 40s who are in their 40s saying, I just went to my first therapy session. And I'm like, wow, that's crazy, right? Because there's so much unpacking that you're gonna now do, and that might take another 10, 20 years as a whole. So thank you for bringing that up. You all mentioned some interesting resources, and I do wanna kind of kick off the second part of the conversation, and we do have some questions from the audience. So I'm gonna ask these kind of more like a quick fire questions. So I want to move into the resources. You all talked about different resources like Sasha, your friends, is it called Aya or Ayana therapy? And feel free if you have the link to share it in the chat as well.
I'll totally do that. I was just thinking I should. It's Ayana therapy.
Ayana therapy.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And Sasha, maybe you can kick us off. So what tools and techniques would you all recommend, regardless of where we are in our journey into mental health and well-being, for us to start to begin to explore and engage in and seek out? What are like the benefits of some of even these resources you want to share?
Helen, can I cut in 1 minute?
Sure.
Okay. Okay. So sorry to interrupt this wonderful, robust, very enriching discussions. This is so awesome. But I just want to say thank you to everyone. I have another engagement that I must leave. I just, Helen is going to continue and take us to a graceful ending, but this is just too wonderful. I hate to leave. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Ms. Effie. Sasha, you can go ahead.
Oh yeah, so I'm just typing that in the chat. That's ayanatherapy.com. But yeah, I think the resources that are, or things that are critical, I think meditation is an absolute must. And I actually hesitate to even use that word because I think meditation has a certain specific connotation, and it's also been kind of co-opted, and it's sort of like, imagine white people kind of sitting on a pillow somewhere, you know, like on a beach somewhere. But really what it is it's just a practice of noticing, right? So getting some separation from your thoughts. So again, rather than you feel the overwhelm or you feel all these sensations and you don't know what's going on and you start to shut down, just start being aware. Oh, I'm starting to shut down, or oh, overwhelm. Even if you just say that word, overwhelm, it's going to create some distance between what's happening you and the action, or kind of like your response to that stimulus. And I also think one of the biggest things, and I'm surprised that this isn't talked about more often, but I learned this later in life and I didn't even learn it from a therapist, which just again goes to show that there's so many ways to learn, but it's called reparenting, basically. And I think a lot of us, we don't get our needs met when we're very young. I mean, I know that, for instance, being told like not to cry and to toughen up was a very, very big part of my upbringing. And so part of what I've learned is just how to be my own parent, essentially, and my own best friend. So one thing you can do is visualize yourself as a small child, because the way you would talk to yourself if you were a little kid and scared or going through some big feelings, you shouldn't say, oh, that's so stupid that you're feeling that, oh, toughen up, oh, this, oh, that. You probably want to nurture that child and be like, hey, I'm here for you. I'm so sorry. Let me hug you. Let me hold you. And that's actually something that I do for myself. I've actually hugged myself. I will say this out loud. If you can't, and the thing is, you have to visualize yourself as a child, because compassion, self-compassion, and self-love, you know, we talk about love in these really wonderful, grandiose terms, but we don't talk about how challenging that is. And part of love is forgiving yourself for hurt that you've caused yourself and others, and really loving yourself, loving your messed up shit, for lack of a better term, loving all of the messiness, all of the mistakes, all that. I remember, you know, I grew up with no sense of self-worth, and a huge sense of self-hatred and self-loathing. And when I first started to love myself, I actually rejected it. My body rejected it. Because again, all my body understood was, you're comfortable hating yourself, and now you feel this new thing, which is like self-love. And my body was like melting down. It didn't know what to do with that. And I actually had to teach myself to normalize myself to that love. And we don't really talk about that enough, how challenging this journey is, and self-sabotage. I mean, this is something that's really great. I recently attended a conference for nonviolent communication, and their introductory panel was all on self-sabotage. And again, when you grow up in a society and environments that really encourage us that we're never good enough and how we need to change and be different, you start to, I'm touching upon so many various touch points that we talked about, like Dr. Rhodes, when you're talking about not being aware, you start to be not aware of all the limitations that you put on yourself, and all the false stories and the negative beliefs and the things that are keeping you down. And part of the journey is to unshackle yourself from believing that you're not deserving and that you're not worthy, and that you have made too many mistakes, or you're too dumb, or you're too fat, or all these things. It's really, how do you become your best friend? How do you become that parent that you didn't have? How do you nurture yourself? How do you give yourself the resources that you desire and that you need to really flourish and thrive?
Thank you. Dr. Rose or Dr. Taki, would you like to go next?
The resources, again, that I was talking about or believe that will work is, like Sasha said, the meditation. I know a lot of people think that that's not something good, but breathing exercises as well. We have to learn a lot of relaxation techniques, which is sometimes walking or just, talking or whatever. My organization, we use all of these resources, one of which is aromatherapy, massages, virtual reality therapy. We do, again, meditation, role playing with drama, role playing with art. So all of those resources are on our facilities. As a matter of fact, we also have the PlayStation. I'm not too familiar with that because I have another therapist that works with me. And we do this thing on the PlayStation for children who come for therapy while they're waiting or whatever. So there's a lot going on. I think there's a lot of things that we could do. I just want to speak a little bit about the breathing part of it. People think that when you say breathe, that means much of nothing, but I want to let you know that the brain tells the heart a lot of stuff, right? But the brain didn't say, give me air or oxygen so that I can do something. And so what the brain does is it just have a heart pump quickly to send blood to us to either take a flight or to take or fight back. So, but the most important thing that goes on is that when we're going through any changes, our oxygen is depleted. So when we take a deep breath, the brain can think clearly. And that's why we have these breathing exercises. And when our brain is depleted from oxygen, we don't think clearly. So we can't make clear decisions. And when a person is breathing, they're bringing in the air so that they can. And a lot of decisions that are made is normally made after we stop and we breathe. And so we push that more than anything. That's something that you can do if you're not even in therapy, is breathing. Take a moment when you get up to that height, when you're feeling, overwhelmed, just stop and breathe so that the decision that you make after that will be clear and not irrational. I'll send you the link to the organization. I am the founder and CEO, and we just entered a new building in April so that we can have these resources available to the community. And I'll send that information to you.
If we had more time, I think I would talk more or hear more about breathing. I think that's the most magical thing that I learned, and still really amazing, especially when you know how breathing makes a difference on day-to-day basis. I teach this every day, whether we call it, mindfulness, emotional intelligence, or anything. The first thing that changes in our body, whether you're happy, shocked, excited, whatever it is, you're breathing. Mm-hmm. That's the first thing that shifts. So when it comes to the resources that we are talking about, there is plenty of resources around us. If we know what we are looking for, I think there is plenty of resources that you can reach out. Of course, the resources might, cost us some, and, might be difficult for some people to get it, some way. But the foundation for me, personally and professionally, is self-awareness. We need to build and invest in understanding ourselves. The more I know what's going on within me, the easiest it would be, to find the solution around me. Every time when I'm anxious and stressed, I don't realize it for a long time, but I noticed that I go to Facebook and YouTube for no reason. I just scroll there, because I'm just avoiding. And when I realized that, it became so easy that within seconds, I realized that I have no reason to come to Facebook except that I'm avoiding whatever I'm supposed to do. And then it helps me to dive in a little bit more. I feel anxious more when I feel lost, when I don't know what I'm dealing with. So this is a very deeper, awareness that I need to, because at that point, I'm just looking here and there. No, I'm insecure about whatever that I'm supposed to do. And my brain is helping me to avoid it, run away, the flight. So once I have that awareness, it became so easy. Oh, you are freaking out, you are scared. And I laugh and I joke with myself. The emotional intelligence that Sasha was talking about is if you could use second person or third person approach, that's how you can help the limbic system disentangle, from other parts of the brain. So if we can build and invest more through reading, mind-body work, conversations, storytelling, journaling, whatever it is in ourselves, I think we can have a lot of resources around us that we can pick and choose whatever works for us. Everything works, but everything might not work for you. And do not stop until you find the one that works for you.
Thank you guys for sharing those resources. So I'll just reiterate some of them. You guys talked about meditation, the practice of noticing, reparenting. You talked about breathing and the relaxation techniques, aromatherapy, virtual reality, role playing with drama and art, the journaling, self-awareness, building and investing in ourselves, the mind-body work. I agree, there's a lot of resources, a lot of things. Here's 3 resources here actually, right? So Dr. Tekia, Dr. Rode, and Sasha all have organizations and institutions that do this work. So they serve as resources. They serve as starting points, so you can always check out their links. Dr. Tekia, if you have a link or anything to your organization on whatever capacity, that you can share in the message, that would be great. And thank you, Sasha and Dr. Rode, for sharing your resources and your links. So we're gonna move on, right? So thank you guys for this wonderful, and I mean, I have to be honest, I've been totally enriched in myself. So a little part of me is like super thankful because I have so many takeaways and so many notes from this conversation. So I'm going to move to the question and answer section because we do have some questions for you guys, and I want to make sure we can use about 5 minutes, 15 minutes. So the first question comes from Sarah. Sarah, actually, I'm going to allow you to talk if you just want to ask your question.
Hi, good morning. I don't know if you can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much. This has been a wonderful session. I had another event actually that I had to postpone it to listen to this because I was so getting so many insights and personal experiences. And thank you so very much for all of you. My question is, how do you have any tips or like how to deal with war experiences or violence? I am from Ethiopia, and there is a war going on in my country right now, and I'm sure you know there's so much happening on the ground, and I really wanted to really get some insight into how can we really deal virtually from here, or even the people that are experiencing this really horrific violence, how can we help them also get out of it, because it's so much to handle sometimes. And maybe Dr. Jacob, I'm sure you've mentioned some, we have a similar cultural background, and maybe you can give us some insights as well. Thank you so much. Thank you for organizing this.
I could take a dive in. I think I don't want to make any assumptions about your experience here, but war is a very complicated thing, and the impact that it has, whether you are personally present there or from a distance, I think is profound, especially with the current environment that is going on. I think there is a sense of helplessness that people feel, not only sadness, disappointment, or anger, but not being able to do something. I don't want to sound someone who doesn't care, but I think there is a really important need for boundary here. Of course, being here in the US and having family and friends and your home country, going through war, it is quite excruciating, but also you have a life. You have, things to handle here. The emotional boundary seems quite important to me. But in order to do that, you have to be aware of what impact it has on you, because these kind of feelings of sadness or helplessness and other things are very sneaky. They kind of, sneak into your sleep, to your work and other things, and they slowly start, to exhaust us. It's very toxic. So if we can have an emotional boundary where you can take time to to worry about your home country or what's going on for a very brief period of time, and then allow your body to rest and do other things at the same time. Otherwise, this war that you are noticing now seems to me has a lot of generational trauma. This country has been in war for a very long time. Our parents have been going through that, our grandparents have been going through that. So there is a lot of things, that we carry on, but I really strongly believe that you have to prioritize your self-care as well. Even if you are continuing to advocate and fight, for peace and other things, your body needs a break, and that comes out of conscious, decisions.
I can give just some resources, and I wasn't sure if you meant like for yourself from a distance or for people there. I know that this is again something that I never learned from any therapists, ironically, but EMDR is something that's proven to be really, really effective for specifically like PTSD and pretty extreme trauma. So that's called the EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And basically the idea, the doctors here could probably explain this so much better than I could, and I'm a little scared that I'm going to totally butcher it. But essentially it's kind of like bypassing a lot of like the talk therapy and going sort of like straight to the source by actually kind of like changing your neural wiring. And so that's something that I would definitely look into. I would also, one thing that I'm really, really, really excited about that's changing, and again, I don't know the access in other countries or even necessarily like the cultural attitudes that might affect it, but the psychedelic and alternative therapies are also, thankfully, there's a big resurgence. So we know drugs like ketamine, psilocybin, these can be really effective in healing, and especially for trauma. So there are like clinics that are opening up. I'm not talking about like recreational use on your own, although I also don't want to stigmatize that. But yeah, there are lots of resources for that, and also really paying attention to the body. Because we think a lot of the times that this is mental health, it's all in our mind, but trauma is stored in our bodies. And they've actually done some studies with war veterans where they've put veterans into the control groups, where they put some into traditional talk therapy, and then they've put some into like massage therapy. And many of the people who did massage therapy were actually further ahead than the people who did just traditional talk therapy. So again, a lot of this trauma is stored in our bodies, so I can't underscore enough. And I actually am, I should have mentioned this earlier, movement is so critical. Like even the word emotion, I don't know how this hadn't occurred to me until recently, but recently it has the word motion in it, right? So for everything that we're experiencing and all of our trauma in our mind, we're carrying that in our body. So being able to move and let go of that, even shaking, even when COVID started, I used to ride my bike across the Brooklyn Bridge, and every time the train came, I used to scream at the top of my lungs. Having outlet, so these things aren't stuck and trapped in your body, and that you're actually moving through that is so critical. I mean, even talking about it, I can't do it without moving, because it's just, it's that powerful. And that's actually when I was talking about how we can learn from kids. That's actually why they're so brilliant emotionally in so many ways. Because you have like, for instance, like a 2-year-old, I teach a class that's called Toddler Temper Tantrums for Adults. The reason is, toddler, they have a very intense experience, right? And they don't hold themselves back and repress and suppress and they go, I shouldn't feel that, I should feel this. They feel something, they go all out. They experience the fullness of that feeling for like a period of time. And then once they're done, they've forgotten about what? I don't know, I'm over it, because they are experiencing things at their fullest and they're letting them go and they're using their physical body to actually have that experience. So I think in that sense, if you have a child at home, I would watch and observe and actually do what they do.
Great, thank you. We have another question from Selena, which has two questions. So question one, what are the signs we should look for in ourselves to know that we are maybe dealing with anxiety and/or depression? And then her second question is, and can you get over mental illness without medication? So whoever wants to kick that off, maybe Dr. Rhodes, if you want to start us off. You're on mute.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about anxiety and just very quickly tell you some of the symptoms that you can be aware of. First is a physiological response. And so the symptoms occur when the moment that we feel anxious. And it's a natural response to stress when we feel anxious. And some of the symptoms that you might be dealing with that you're not aware of is feeling restless when you get there, or you wound up on edge, or you're feeling easily fatigued. These are some of the things I actually went through with anxiety, having difficulty concentrating, your mind pretty much going blank. You're not aware of what's going on, or you just sort of sitting in a stupor, or you're being irritable for no reason, or having these muscle tensions. Now, I wouldn't say that this is, a list for all, but when we get into those situations after we feel so anxious, we need to question ourselves, what is the feelings behind this anxiousness? So this is where the illness starts, in our mind and our thoughts. And so our body responds to the stress. And these are the things that we have to think about, what's happening, what's really happening to us, and take notice of these different things that's happening. When we worry, of course, our heart begins to race, and we have this clammy feeling like a cold sweat and all of that. And we become, some of us even become nauseated. But that's just a natural response to the stress that's going through our bodies. And so again, and for anxiety, you can feel irritable, you can feel restless or blank, if I may say, or having difficulty concentrating, your mind just sort of gone blank, or just muscle tension. And these were some of the signs that I noticed, because they were different than when I used to, was familiar with the way that I responded to stress. So so that's part of some anxiety feelings. That's not to say that's all, but that is some of the biggest things that we could look at and kind of check out and see, where are these things in my life, or what am I doing, or where am I at this point?
Just to add to what Dr. Rhodes was saying, I think anxiety is important and healthy, but it kind of becomes difficult when it crosses the line, and that's the fine line that we need to understand. I really appreciate this book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. It's a very interesting book if you haven't come across that. We need stress for daily functioning. We need stress to focus and concentrate, to be productive, it's really critical. But some of the things that we need to pay attention is that, especially for young professionals, or people who deal with a lot of situational factors, the situational factors might trigger anxiety, and that's okay. You have a presentation to do, you feel anxious. Once it's done, you're fine. Like you're stuck in traffic, you get anxious, and once you are out of it, you're fine. But the problem with anxiety is that once the situation is done, the anxiety doesn't go away. And that's where we need to start paying attention. At first, there was a stimulus that caused it, but through time, in the absence of the stimulus, the anxiety still continues. And as a result of that, if you start to notice a lot other parts of your life starts to get affected, like especially your sleep, that it takes you more time to fall asleep, or you get distracted easily, and your ability, to be productive, wake up, in the morning on time, or things start to make you feel, like uncomfortable around that you used to, really not even bothered by. So there is a number of factors that you would notice gets affected, and those are the symptoms of anxiety. But I want to be mindful here. We are not talking about the diagnosis of anxiety. We are talking about the general anxiety, even with depression. But if this persists, then your immune system starts to go down and you start to develop a way of life that is based on anxiety. That becomes a diagnosis of anxiety. So it is very important that I was talking about earlier, to have this awareness. When I'm anxious, how do I react? What changes in my body? Every time when I ask, my participants, my clients, everybody experiences anxiety differently. Some people say, like, I experience, really a lot of pain on my lower back. The most common ones could be chest pain, kind of, disturbing feeling in your stomach. Some people experience, diarrhea or, some other things. And a lot of the physiological reaction actually resembles physical symptoms, problems related to physical symptoms. So our first reaction could be like, what did I eat, that I'm having, diarrhea or, GI. But it could be as a result of anxiety. And we know that if it is happening in the absence of the stimulus that we are talking about. But it comes, with being aware of what is changing on day-to-day basis. From what you used to handle, what's changing. But the biggest challenge that I want to highlight again is that any anxiety doesn't develop over a week or 2 or a month. It takes years. So it might be difficult, like to say, this is what happened. A lot of people could do that with the help of a therapist and others. But if your answer is, this is how I've been all the time, most likely you are struggling with anxiety or depression. Because we don't develop with that. We acquire, these kind of styles, and then we take them as our own, with time.
Thank you, Dr. Taki. I know, Dr. Rhodes, you have to leave to get to your next appointment. So thank you so much for being part of this conversation and taking part in today's discussion. It was so rich and it was so lovely to have you. I will definitely follow up with you in email and share the link as well as the Facebook Live. And we'll continue to engage and continue to do more work and try to get your work out into our community as richly as possible. So thanks again.
Yeah, thank you for being a part of having the opportunity to be a part of this panel. I want to thank my other panelists. It's a pleasure meeting you, and hopefully we'll see each other soon.
Thank you, Dr. Rhodes.
Sure, thank you. Bye-bye now.
Bye. We have one last question, so we'll take this last question and then we'll wrap up. Mr. Gubbermichael, I'm gonna unmute you. So if you'd like to ask that question yourself, that'd be great. Oh, I think he just left. It's okay, but I think it might be helpful for what others might want to hear. So he said, most of the time, he said, thank you to the panelists, and most of the time psychological burdens comes from the house. Parents do not know the psychological burden that they inflict on their child. Most of the time, the parents feel whatever they do is best for the child. What recommendations would you think are helpful for parents in terms on how to ask for forgiveness to their child or children? Most of the time, he said, I've had a conversation with blame their parents with their current situation. So I guess the question is really, what recommendations do you have that would be helpful for parents in terms of coming to their child and actually like apologizing or asking for forgiveness?
Sure.
Good. Go.
Sure. I actually kind of teared up hearing that question. I think that is, I've spoken and had a lot of conversations. I don't think that anyone has ever asked that. And I think that's one of the actually most beautiful and profound questions that I've heard. We have Dr. Jacob, you mentioned this before, but I think the effects of colonization go so far and wide. And one of them is that there's this idea of kind of this top-down hierarchy and this authoritarianism that I think actually does start for a lot of us with parenting. I saw a meme recently that was that said something like a lot of people's first bully is actually their parents, and what's worse, the parents don't even realize it or ever acknowledge it. And I think that's actually very true. I think a lot of the places where we internalize even abuse is in the home. I think a lot of the things, it's funny. I think that for a lot of us, if our parents heard somebody else talk to us the way our parents do, I think our parents would probably beat the shit out of those people. But somehow, if it's within the family, it's not only acceptable, it's actually even talked about as like a form of love, to be critical or abusive of your child. Like they act like they're doing you a favor. So I think, and I not just teared up, but I've goosebumps all over my body, because I think for a parent to even open the discussion to something like this and to humble themselves is so beautiful and powerful in and of itself, that I think if you go in with that sentiment of I really care, and you open yourself in that way, I think just doing that is powerful in and of itself and will make a really huge impact. But yeah, humility, and to really try to, I think the biggest thing you can do as if you're asking from the parent, is to work on your own resilience. If you want forgiveness and you want to open this, you have to acknowledge that this is about the other person and not about you. And so this isn't a time for your defensiveness. Like, I think one of the most important things is that you work on that for yourself, so that you can be in a space to receive the child, or even if it's not a child, the aggrieved part, because we all wrong people all the time, right? So to be in a place where you receive non-defensively, where you can say, yeah, but I was doing my best, or yeah, but you were this, or yeah, but I was busy or working a lot, of course. And again, for the children, that I think grace and understanding that our parents are human and they're making mistakes, that's so important. But certainly to receive that, and to open yourself to that, and to work on yourself such that you can acknowledge, say, yes, I did cause that pain, and I'm so sorry, and I want to rectify that, and to show up in earnestness. I think that the showing up is the 90% of it, and the not getting defensive, and the not accusing and blaming and reactive. If you spend most of your time being quiet and just listening and saying, I hear you, and I'm sorry, I think that you're probably way ahead of the curve. And I really applaud you for doing the kind of introspection that you're obviously doing, that even prompted that question. And I hope that others are inspired and encouraged by it like I was. I mean, it made me even think of mistakes I'm making in my daily life, and how I can be opening the door for other people to say, hey, I'm here if you have criticisms or issues with me, to just listen and hear you. I'm so sad that you left, because I wish you could hear my gratitude and appreciation for you asking it.
Absolutely. I think the question is really critical, and we do a lot of that, a lot of work to address that question. But I think it is different for different parents with different backgrounds. A lot of my work with immigrant parents who come in here with their children is different than who raise their children here. And this cultural shift and these cultural dynamics, I think, brings a lot of conflict, especially for children who grow up, in the American culture outside of the house, and then in their own, the parents' culture in their own household. There is a lot of conflict. Parents usually want to raise their children based on the culture that they grew up with, which usually doesn't even match to the culture that exists in their own home country. there is a lot of conflict that comes with that. And parents usually, I think, have a very strong sense of guilt and a very strong voice inside them that makes them, more defensive and protective of their children, and not usually willing to listen to their child. What's going on? How can I help you? Are you feeling all right? There's a lot of things that they could do if they step back and give the child, a chance to listen. And I don't want to put the burden on children, but if as children, we could understand our parents, migration or experience as well, the fear that they hold on. Even, Black parents here, how much, that they fear every day if their son is going to come home. And the defensiveness that comes in, you late, half an hour, and half an hour might be, like that you were talking to your friend, but the anxiety that it brings in really becomes quite overwhelming. So if we could understand that, we can easily neutralize it, saying, as you shared, Sasha, I understand that you're worried, but I'm okay. I'm with my friend. I understand, like this is what's going on, but actually this is what I've been going through. There is a lot of things, that we can communicate if we can read between the lines and go a little bit deeper than, the defensiveness or the projection that we go through. Otherwise, if our emotions are focusing on the shallow presentation, it's always going to be conflict, and no one is going to listen to anyone else, and that takes us more to problematic issue. But I don't want to dive in much because we don't have much time, but also recognizing the complexity of, like these parent-child dynamics, especially for people of color and individuals, with immigrant backgrounds.
Thank you, guys. This was such a wonderful conversation. So we're going to conclude here. But first, I want to thank the audience for staying on, even if we just dived in a little bit later than we planned on. And thank you for those who are on Facebook Live and for those who joined live with us. This was such, I hope you got as much as I got out of this conversation, because I personally feel like I have definitely walked away with a lot of resources, new knowledge, just a sense and a reinvigoration to even look deeper in myself and really do more work, right? And I hope you guys have the same energy as well as you move forward. I want to say a special thank you so much to Dr. Jacob Tekier and Sasha. You guys have been phenomenal. This conversation is so rich because of your time, your presence, and your availability on a Saturday, and your endurance to stay this long on this conversation. So I have so much gratitude for you guys. Thank you again for joining us. We will definitely be following up via email, and we look forward to working with you guys in a number of different ways and platforms to continue these conversations, not just about mental health, but really bring that support to the community in the ways that they really need it and that they can engage with. So thank you all. I can't say how much I'm grateful for this conversation. You guys have been wonderful, and I hope everybody has such a blessed Saturday wherever you may be. And, may the sun kiss your faces. So have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're awesome, Helen. Thank you so much for doing this.
And thank you, Wemi, for being our tech support. You did such an amazing job. I always feel like we leave tech support, but like we couldn't do this without them. So thank you, guys. Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Good job, Wemi. Can you hear me? You can stop the live. Hi, Wemi. Can you hear me?
I'm here.
Okay, great. Can you go ahead and stop the live?